Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to another episode of Manifesting Muslima. I'm your host, Zara Pedersen, and today we're going to talk about a bit of a more serious subject. We're going to talk about mental health and the law of attraction and whether or not you can manifest good things in your life, specifically if you have mental health disorders where negative thoughts are quite compulsive and you have a difficult time controlling negative thinking. So this episode was prompted by a question that I received over on TikTok, where one of the followers over there asked if she could manifest good things in her life, even if she has anxiety and OCD, and it's quite difficult for her to control her thoughts at times. And her concern was, if my thoughts create my reality and my main thinking or my compulsive thinking is negative, then can I manifest good things? And I thought it was such a brilliant question. I also gave a very short answer over on TikTok, but I also was like, I think I need to do a podcast episode on this topic because it is such a serious topic, and I think it's quite relevant for a lot of us. And for that reason, I was like, I need to sit down and record a bit more in depth and give some more explanation. Off the top of this episode, I want to also really clarify that I'm not always the most politically correct. So if I use a term that you find offensive or, that doesn't agree with you, I don't mean to do that. I'm just not aware of all the correct terms that are floating around these days. I'm just not aware of all that. And so as somebody who suffers from anxiety and depression myself, I just use terms that I use to describe myself. So if any of what I'm about to say is offensive to you, I really don't mean that to be. But I hope that you can see past that and understand that I'm not coming from a position of privilege in this situation. I very much am somebody who has suffered from anxiety and depression from a very, very, very young age. I was, before I was 10, had quite a few panic attacks. So I have like anxiety/panic disorder, and then the depression kind of, they're besties, and they kind of go hand in hand. And so the depression came on in my early teenage years, if not in my tween years. And today I am on daily medication for it, and it has helped quite a bit. But that's not what we're going to talk about necessarily, but it's just to give you a bit of a background on my position coming into this topic as somebody who understands the plight of having mental disorders where you don't necessarily feel like you can control it at the best of times, and so how to deal with it. And so right off, me saying all of this, I think it should tell you that, of course, you can still use the law of attraction even if you have mental disorders, whether it be anxiety, OCD, depression, PTSD, bipolar. There are so many ways around all of these things where you can still use the law of attraction because, as I also mentioned in this TikTok video, the law of attraction is about more than just your thoughts. The very simplified version of the law of attraction and the way that people have sort of fitted snugly into like a quotable sentence is your thoughts become your reality, or your thoughts create your life or your reality, or however they say it. Like that's like the quotable that people keep saying. It's like what you think is what you become, or creates the reality that you're living in. And while I understand the catchiness and wanting to create something that is kind of a bit snappy and people can just, hear one time and kind of receive it in an easier way, there is so much more to the law of attraction. It is not simply a matter of your reality is based solely on your thoughts. If that was the case, I'm pretty sure most of us would have very turbulent lives, because at one moment we have the most positive, uplifting, supportive, forgiving thoughts about ourselves, and the next moment we have, very degrading, unforgiving, hurtful thoughts about ourselves or our reality. So if our realities were about ourselves, so if our reality was shaped by our thoughts, then you can see that our realities would suddenly be a roller coaster. We'd have high highs and low lows in a matter of, days, and that ongoing, So of course that's not that's it's more to it than just that. The law of attraction, of course, operates from a place of mindset and belief, and your mindset and your belief are to a great length shaped by the thoughts that you are consistently having. So if you're consistently having thoughts that men cannot be trusted, that men are scum, that men are only interested in you for sex, or men only like women who look a specific way or whatever, then that is going to start creating a mindset for you around what men are that you're then going to start believing. And that mindset and that belief is then going to shape your actions. And your actions are ultimately what you then create your reality based off of, because your actions are the things that are going to spur on, more action, or the inactivity, if there's a belief that makes you not take action on something, is what's going to hold back certain opportunities from coming your way. So it is more than just the thoughts themselves. It is a question of how much these thoughts are that are shaping your belief system. Now, of course, some of us with mental health disorders have, will have highs and lows. And sometimes when we're at the lows of our mental health disorders, when we're really struggling, this is when our thoughts can literally create our reality. Not so much that the disasters are happening, but create our realities to the point where we stop socializing, where we become shut-ins, where we don't do certain things, or if it's a case of OCD, and I'm not talking about that mainstream, oh look, I'm OCD, I don't like dust on my table, shut up, you don't have OCD. OCD, I'm talking about, wanting to flick the switch on and off, 27 times, and if you don't do it 27 times, something bad's going to happen to your mum. That kind of OCD thinking. I'm not talking about like, I'm so OCD, I cannot live in clutter. Linda, stop romanticizing OCD. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. It's the same with anxiety and depression. I mean, honestly, I'm not even going to go down this road, because if you're listening to this episode, I will assume that you understand the difference between a romanticized, oh, I'm a little bit anxious because I'm stressed right now, versus having anxiety, and liking a clean space versus having OCD, where, your thoughts are telling you if your space isn't clean, then something bad's going to happen to you. So I'm just going to assume that you know this and we're all aware of that, okay? That's what we're talking about here. So, of course, if you have these kinds of very genuine mental health disorders, where sometimes you go into that low and your mental illness starts to dictate your life for you, because you haven't either learnt enough about your mental disorder to be able to control certain aspects of it yet, or you're not seeking help, or you're not being medicated, then yes, this is when your mental health disorder can take control. And I'm saying this from a place of complete non-judgment, because I was there myself. When was it now? It's probably like 10 years ago now. I still hadn't had my anxiety and depression diagnosis. It was right before I got it. And so I'm from a very Arabic, not very Arabic. My dad is obviously Danish, but from my mum's side, the Arabicness of we don't know what mental illness even is. And so when I was growing up, nobody actually knew what anxiety and depression really was. And, I think a lot of you actually, I don't even think it was just my household. Let me just correct myself, because I'm not that special and unique. But growing up as a kid who was born in the 80s, raised in the 90s and early 2000s, we didn't have as much information about mental health disorders as we do today. So there was a lot of stigma around having depression or anxiety, and there was a very wrong image of what that would look like. And so when I was displaying symptoms of having anxiety, panic disorder, and depression, it wasn't picked up on. And in fact, I just remember, and the reason I think why I'm saying very Arabic household is because it was sort of believed that this was like a jinn possession type thing. I mean, honestly, reach out to me if you've been in this position yourself, because I know that I can't be the only one, and I know I'm not. Like, I know that it's like a very common thing in Arabic households to be like, hey, something's going on with you, you're very scared, it has to be a jinn that's messing you, let's read some Quran, let's do an exorcism. Yes, I've had an exorcism done to me as well. That could maybe be a story time for another day. But yeah, I can laugh at it now because, you know, hindsight, my parents didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know what it was. So my diagnosis didn't come until very, very late on. And I was actually in sort of like my late 20s. But before I got my diagnosis, I was at my absolute lowest, and I didn't understand anxiety and depression. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know that that was what I had. I thought I was literally losing my mind, not understanding that what I was having was just panic disorders. But the point it got to was that it overtook my life, and it started dictating my actions in the way that I stopped going to college, I stopped going to work, I was using all of my savings that I had at the point and living off of those. I wouldn't leave the house and at the time I still had my dog Doodle, the older dog who's blind now, the black one if you see him in my videos, and I would only go out on walks with him, and it would be so short because I was terrified of going outside because I'd always have a panic attack going out. And so for a good, like, I can't even remember how long, because honestly that whole time for me is such a massive blur. But I ultimately became a bit of a shut-in, and I recognized, luckily in the end, that I had a problem, and I then went and got help, and then I got the diagnosis of severe anxiety and depression. And I didn't start medication until a couple of years ago. So I did start off just having the diagnosis. I was offered medication, but I tried to do it through lifestyle and understanding, and it got me a certain way. But now I'm on medication. Again, I can talk about that at a different time if you would like me to talk about that, but it's not really on this subject today. The point, what I was trying to say with that story is that sometimes if we don't understand our mental disorder, or if we're allowing the mental disorder and the fear around the disorder to take hold, then it can dictate our life. But that is not law of attraction. That is literally our fear instinct kicking in. That is us trying, like our ego trying to protect us, saying, oh, this is scary. So every time I go out, I feel like I get a panic attack, so I'm going to stay in. And so that's not law of attraction. That is our fear basically allowing a mental disorder to dictate how we then go about our lives. But to kind of try and get back on point here in that, you know, I would argue that, well, no, I don't know if I can argue that, but if you're listening to this episode and you're aware that you have a mental disorder, then perhaps you're not at that point where you have allowed your mental disorder to be a shut-in or to have that kind of extreme living based off of that fear. But you might be aware that you're having these compulsive negative thoughts. And as somebody who wants to learn how to use the law of attraction, and you understand that your thoughts and your mindset has a role to play, then you might think, how then do I go about this? And so the trick is to be able to differentiate between when your mental disorder is shouting out loud versus when your intuition is telling you something. And this is a skill that we all need to learn. And it's not just us that have mental disorders and are struggling through when is my disorder talking versus when is my intuition talking. This is just for most of us. Like, when is the ego talking? When is it the disorder talking? When is it my trauma? When is it something else? So this is a skill that we need to learn. Now, we're obviously today just talking mental disorder. Otherwise, I could, talk about all sorts of stuff, and it would be very, very confusing if it isn't already. But let's say you're thinking about doing something. Sorry, let me just take my slippers off. I don't know if you heard that. Let me just take my slippers off so they don't make noise underneath the table. But if you have a mental disorder and you want to use the law of attraction, and you're worried because your mindset is quite often full of these compulsive negative thoughts, those thoughts, again, don't necessarily dictate your future or your behavior. So if you can learn to differentiate when the anxiety or the depression or the OCD or the PTSD or something completely different is talking, you can, come at it from a place of grace and forgiveness, and be, I recognize you're here, I see you, I hear you, but I'm not going to follow what you're saying. So you can rationally and logically, and I know these are very big words when we're sitting in the middle of a panic attack, trust, again, speaking from experience. So there's nothing in me that'll belittle it in any way, shape, or form. But we can, to a certain extent, before it kind of takes control, we can still use that rational, logical mind sometimes to be like, I recognize you. And sometimes we will even placate it. So if it's OCD, we'll say like, I'm going to do the light switch thing. It's fine, but I know logically it's not going to happen, but I'm still going to do it. And then I'm going to leave the house. Like, you know, do what you need to do in that moment. When I have anxiety, and I still have anxiety attacks, even though I'm on medication, I accept it. And in that moment, I will still placate it by saying, okay, well, something's clearly is going on here. My body is having these reactions. My mind is having a reaction. So I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to respect it. And I'm going to go, listen, I get you. I'm almost speaking to myself as a child when this happens. And I'm like, I see you. It's okay. We can take a break. We can sit down for a minute. You know, sometimes I'll take CBD oil, some drops. Sometimes I'll put on something that's fun to watch, and I'll lie down and just kind of basically show my mind and my body I'm perfectly safe. Nothing's going to happen to me. And I'm literally like, it sounds kind of ludicrous sometimes when you say it out loud, but I'll have to split myself into two. There's the part of me that is that irrational, oh my God, something bad is happening, versus the other part of me that is the logical side that kind of looks at that little child of me that's panicking and saying, it's okay, you're totally safe and I'll be here with you and I'll look after you. So sometimes it's kind of saying, it's cool, we're going to do this for a minute, but then when we're done and we'll move on. Okay, so the trick here is, again, as I said, not to let it dictate your whole life. While we can placate it and we can say, okay, I'm going to sit with you for a minute, we're also going to say, okay, and now the minute is up. So now we need to move on, right? I am not a mental health professional. I'm only speaking from personal experience. So if at any moment you're thinking, my GP has told me something different, or my therapist, follow what your GP or therapist has told you, of course. Don't listen to it. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm just speaking from my personal experience with this, in terms of how to deal with it when, you know, there's a little flare up. So coming back to using the law of attraction. So when we can learn to differentiate between when our disorder is talking versus when our intuition is talking, it becomes easier for us to put more of that focus over onto the positive thoughts. It becomes easier for us to, while the thoughts are still there, those compulsive negative thoughts are still there, it's easier for us to kind of push them aside a little bit. It doesn't mean that they're not there. By my pushing those thoughts aside doesn't mean that they're not still loud and that they're not still saying the negative things. It just means that my focus and my attention is no longer solely on them. I'm not giving them the arena. If they want to shout, they can shout from backstage, but I'm going to try and give myself the arena, my intuitive self, my higher self, call it whatever you want, woo-woo, hippy-dippy talk. But the point is, I'm allowing my truer self to have that arena, and I'm fully acknowledging what's going on behind the stage or behind the scene, but I don't need to focus on it all the time. And again, it's a skill, it takes practice, but it's worth getting used to doing that if you have a disorder that is probably going to stay with you for the rest of your life, or at least have some sort of impact on the rest of your life. It really helps to find a way to live with it where it's there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it dictates the rest of your life. And so when you learn how to do that, using the law of attraction, despite having mental disorders, becomes much easier. Because we're no longer denying parts of ourselves. We're not pretending that these things aren't happening. We're accepting it, we're forgiving it, we're allowing it to happen. We're just placing our focus elsewhere. And another thing that I'll say to that is also when you start trying to differentiate between, well, when do I know when it's like my disorder talking versus when it's my higher self, intuitive self, my higher nefs, all of these things. And to that, I can't remember who it was. I think it was like in an audio book or something where someone said, you know, intuition will always come from a place of love and peace and sort of like that, like very calm, like elevated emotions. Whereas our ego, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, our trauma, our hurt selves, our generational traumas and burdens we're carrying with all of those things always come from a place of fear. So if it is intuition, it will be from a place of love and acceptance, joy, peace, happiness. If it's anything else than intuition, it's coming from a place of fear. I think this is so important to really take in and really understand. And this, again, with practice, this skill, you can learn to really hone it and get better at it. But when my anxiety comes in and says, hey, or when I get a thought that says, hey, let's not post today on TikTok, or let's not put a podcast episode up, or whatever, right? And I say, oh, why is that? And I start thinking, oh, where's that coming from? And then one of two things is going to happen. Oftentimes, one of two things is going to happen. It's going to be, you're tired, Zara, and you really need a break. And I feel like I would force myself today if I did it, and it wouldn't be a genuine episode. And rather than just putting out content for the sake of putting out content, I'd rather put out content when I have content that has meaning and that has value. Or it could be from another place where it says, nobody's listening anyway. You're wasting your time. And, who do you think you are? Nobody's going to listen to this episode. Nobody cares what you have to say. And can you hear the difference in the two? One is from a place of love and acceptance for myself, where it's like, you've been feeling a bit tired. You've been feeling a bit worn out. You need a bit of rest. And also it feels a bit forced if you need to do this right now. So it's not coming from a place of genuine connection with the audience, with the brand, with the messaging. So it might actually be better for you if you take a step back and take that rest, and then you can post an episode tomorrow, versus I'm afraid of the outcome, or the outcome doesn't please me. There's fear around it, fear of people's judgment, fear of me wasting my time, fear of me looking like an idiot, fear of me, whatever, blah, 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 blah. So one of those two things can happen whenever a thought comes up. And so once you start to really learn how to, again, like, it sounds really weird, but almost split yourself into two and have these conversations with yourself. Sometimes it might be three. Sometimes you might have to have a third voice coming in if it helps. But the point is being able to have, oh, excuse me. No, little lady. We don't do that when we're recording podcasts. We know that. And while it sounds crazy, it helps for us to have these conversations with ourselves and normalize having these conversations with yourselves, where you can have, like a whole breakdown of a thought or a conversation or an action or an inaction or something to that effect. Figure out where it's coming from. Ask yourself questions. Ask yourselves the kind of questions that you would ask a really good friend of yours. So if a really good friend of yours says, oh, I've been doing this podcast for 3 months and I've only got 50 listeners per episode. And so I'm starting to get tired of it and I feel like, I don't want to do it. It's useless. Would you say to your friend, well, then don't do it? No, you'd be like, nah, I'm one of those 50 listeners. I always listen to your podcast. I'm looking forward to that next episode. I'd love for you to have another episode coming up. You'd be like, no, what's going on? Well, why not? Do you not have anything to talk about? And so if the thoughts that came from her were, oh, people don't listen, people don't care, you'd be like, I care. I want to hear it. I'm supporting you. Come on, let's do this. Versus if she said to you, I'm feeling sick, I don't have a voice, I'm really tired, you'd be like, girl, rest. You can always, I'll wait till next episode. You're totally fine. Like, do you see what I mean? Like, sometimes you need to talk to yourself like your own best friend and ask yourself the questions you would ask your best friend if she came to you with the same situation that you're currently in. And once you learn how to differentiate between a fear-based thought, which is where our anxiety and our OCD and our depression and all of those things are coming from, versus a place of love and acceptance and forgiveness and grace, then you can start allowing yourself to focus on your intuition, sorry, that sounded weird, intuition, taking that step forward and saying, I accept this thought, my dear precious anxiety, OCD, PTSD, whatever is going on over here. And you can have it, but you can have it over there. Just have it right there. You can have all the space, but over there. Take a step back. And for now, I'm just going to focus on what the intuition is telling me. So we're not denying ourselves anything. We're not trying to deny our disorder. We're not trying to pretend that it's not there. We're not trying to pretend for anybody outside. It's very much from a place of acceptance, love, and grace towards ourselves. It's towards ourselves. And it's so important. And so when you can do this, it becomes easier for you to go about your law of attraction journey, not too concerned about the negative thoughts that are happening in the background that are spurred on by your disorder. And that's where the magic then starts happening for you. Number one, because it teaches you how to live somewhat peacefully with your disorder. Again, we have flare-ups, even as I said, myself, who's on daily medication for my depression and anxiety, will still have flare-ups. And I'll probably have the rest of my life that way. But it is no longer to the point where it dictates my life, because I've learned to accept that it is there, and I've learned not to give it the airtime that it used to have, and I've learned to put my focus elsewhere on bigger and better things for me without depriving myself of having my anxious thoughts when they need to be have had, or allowing myself to take that step back from time to time and be like, I'm just going to give you 5 minutes. It's okay. We can take 5 minutes now where we're having a little bit of anxiety and where we're just letting our world kind of collapse a little bit. But then when the 5 minutes is over, we also get up, we dust ourselves off, and we put our big girl panties on again and go about our day. Not that our big girl panties weren't actually on when we were having our little breakdown, because actually they were still on there. We just tighten them. We just pull them up a little bit more. Give ourselves a wedgie. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to share with you today. If you're sitting out there and you have a mental disorder, whatever it might be, just know that you can still use the law of attraction. There is still hope for you in terms of manifesting good things into your life. It is more than just allowing your thoughts to create your reality. It's more than that. You still have to do the mindset work, the belief work. You still have to make the dua. You still have to take action. You still have to do the decluttering. You still have to have sabr, practice gratitude. There are so many more elements that go into the law of attraction, some on a subconscious level, some on a very conscious level. But once we first get started on our journey with the law of attraction, it all is very much on a conscious level, because we need to learn how to do these things because we're not used to it. And then at some point it'll become more of a subconscious thing. But there is still very much hope for you to, go out there and manifest beautiful, positive things into your life. And you don't have to feel like it is all hope is lost for you because you have something rummaging in the back of your mind that is creating some devastating thoughts for you. It doesn't matter. It's totally okay. It's perfectly acceptable. It's perfectly normal. We are many out there who feel the same way and struggle with the same things. And if at any moment you feel like, oh, I'm kind of struggling with this a little bit more, there's something here that I'd really like to discuss with somebody or talk to somebody about, I would really recommend that you look at my group membership, Manifesting Muslima membership, and sign up to that, where you can have a conversation with me and a very supportive group of women. And together, we're literally learning and transforming with each other and becoming that next level of ourselves that we've always known was in there. And we're basically just letting that person come out. And it's such a beautiful, transformative group where I'm literally seeing women every week be like, I crossed another thing off my list. Oh my God, I made it to this level. I feel good about this. I had this conversation with that person. This is amazing because now I feel less friction on this, or I feel clarity around this. It is absolutely beautiful, and it's a wonderful, most blessed place. So if you're sitting out there and you're thinking, I feel quite alone in my journey, join this community. This is literally what I've created it for. I don't want you to sit out there on your own. Even the best of us need somebody else to talk to, and we have a community. It's £10 a month, and we meet twice a week while although while you're listening to this, well, if you're listening to this in Ramadan, we only meet once a week, which is on Sundays because we're fasting. But back after Ramadan, we're back to twice a week. So you should definitely go and sign up for that if you would like that kind of community and that kind of support around you. All right, my darling, I have spoken far too much already. Thank you so much for listening. I hope there was something beneficial for you in this episode. If you've got any questions, if you've got any suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to me over on my Instagram at Manifesting Muslima. And until next time, my darling friend, please don't forget to live in love.